Hello there, and welcome to Faith Insights. Today, let's talk about the book of Job. And as a little play on words that works in English, we're going to figure out what our real job is moving forward. And I mention that because often this book is used as a philosophical discussion starter for why do bad things happen to good people, and why do good things sometimes happen to bad people? I love the fact that when you dive into the book and you read all of the chapters here, all 42 chapters in succession, it doesn't take long before you realize, wait a minute, this book is less about explaining suffering and more about transforming the sufferer. Because there are going to be a lot of people making a lot of claims and coming to a lot of conclusions, and more often than not, those conclusions and those perspectives turn out to be very wrong. And God, who knows all the answers to the questions that we ask, He doesn't spend very much time in this book giving answers to those questions, but rather asking additional questions, the answers to which mankind can't come close to fathoming, let alone starting to answer. And so, what's the point? This book redirects all the questions that we may have about the struggles and the challenges of mortality toward questions like, who is God? What are His attributes? What are His characteristics? What is He like? Can I trust Him? Especially when it doesn't make any sense. Especially when He's silent. Especially when our world seems to be falling apart, or we're not getting the things that we so desperately are seeking for. This book, for me, rather than offering a neat explanation and providing perfect conclusions to all of my dilemmas and my challenges, this book invites us into a deeper relationship with God and putting less requirements upon Him or demands upon Him for giving reasons. So we shift from seeking reasons towards seeking a better relationship, a better understanding of who God is, and in so doing, we'll better understand who we are, who our loved ones are, and all of the challenges of mortality will fall into a little better perspective, an eternal perspective, if you will. So, without foundation, let's jump in. Job, the man. We don't know exactly when he lived. It seems that he predates the Israelite time. There's no mention of Moses or the law or Joshua or conquest or Solomon or David or Saul before him. There's none of that in this book. So many scholars conclude that Job might be a contemporary with some of the ancient patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob time frame. He lives in the land of Uz in verse 1. Again, we don't know where that is for sure, although Lamentations seems to link Uz with the region of Edom, which is southeast of the Dead Sea. So here's a guy who the very biographical information that we lack is instructive for us as Latter-day readers. We don't have to know the answer to everything in order to gain benefit and growth from interacting with this story. Just like I don't need to know the answer to all of my challenges, whether they be internal wrestles and struggles or external issues that I have to deal with. I don't have to know everything about it to be able to deepen my relationship with God and move forward in faith, in greater faith, increasing faith, which is hopefully what we're going to see, not just in Job's story, but in our own life progression on the covenant path. So here we are. It tells us in verse 1 that he was a perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. That's the kind of man he is. The word perfect here is not without blemish or without sin or challenge or struggle. Tom, in Hebrew, it means blameless, complete, finished, you might say. It doesn't mean that there haven't been lots of challenges and struggles along the way, but that sets the stage. And then it lists all of the amazing things that he had. His wealth in verse 3, him doing burnt offering for his family according to the number, which is reminiscent of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob's time frame. And everything seems to be going great. And if this were our story, we would hope that the book would end there and he did live happily ever after. But fortunately, most of us aren't living in a fairy tale. We're living in mortality. And it's a test, it's a trial. It's full of challenges and setbacks and ironies and difficult things to try to navigate. And so where does that start? Verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God, or Joseph Smith changed that to the children of God, came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. In the Hebrew, this is ha-Satan, the Satan. The word Satan in the Hebrew is an accuser, somebody who tries to prevent you, an adversary that prevents you from going where you want to go or doing what you want to do. So Satan has become the chief title for Lucifer, but it's also used in other places, like when Jesus rebukes Peter. Get thee behind me, Satan, hearkening back to this meaning in the Hebrew of what a Satan is, somebody who tries to prevent you from accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish. In this context here, there's been much debate. Is Satan from hell actually going up into heaven and having a conversation with God? Or is it allegorical, metaphorical? If you read the Come Follow Me manual, it talks about the metaphorical aspects here. There's another way to look at this as well, that regardless of who is playing the role of Ha-Satan, the Satan, the essence is, this is the accuser. So if we turn to Revelation chapter 12, verse 10, we see one of the titles for Satan revealed, the accuser of our brethren. So one of the things that Satan does is he points fingers of accusation, fingers of judgment and condemnation. He did it up in heaven. He's doing it today to you and to me. He's constantly reminding you of how bad you are and of how unworthy you are and of how far short of perfection you have fallen. That is what an accuser does. Ironically, the antidote to the accusations of the Satan is the advocate with the Father, the defense against those accusations. He who is willing to stand betwixt or between you and that pointing finger of justice and judgment and scorn and accusations. That's Jesus Christ. So you get these two roles, the accuser and the advocate. One who is willing to not just stand between, but actually take your place and say, you're right, those accusations are accurate, it's true. Let judgment and justice have their full effect on me. I will absorb it for and in behalf of all of us. So you get this incredible Christ-like symbol that comes out, even though in the book of Job here at the beginning, our full focus and attention is on the accuser, who, interestingly enough, every single accusation that the Satan in this book makes, every claim, every scenario that is laid out turns out to be completely wrong. He isn't right. He's making lots of judgments, lots of predictions, lots of promises even. None of them turn out to be accurate or to carry the day. Now, brothers and sisters, that's significant for my life and for your life in the latter days today. And we're not talking about next year, next decade, or far into the future. We're talking about today. That's important to keep in mind as we study the book of Job, that you and I have somebody who is still playing the role of Ha-Satan in our lives, the Satan. He's constantly accusing us. He's constantly condemning and judging and trying to drag us down and make us feel less than we really are. And he's constantly cursing and making predictions. They're all wrong. He doesn't have power to carry out promises that he makes or predictions that he unfolds for our future. So this part of the story is again an invitation for us to turn our faith to Christ rather than our fear towards Satan. So the claim is made that the only reason Job is a perfect and upright man who's willing to fear God and eschew evil is because he's so prosperous. We're listing all of the things that he has in verse 3, all of his substance. And Satan is claiming, look, anybody can be good when you're that rich and that prosperous. So God says, okay, you can take away all of that. So in verse 14 and 15, we lose the thousands of oxen and donkeys. In verse 16 and 16, we lose the sheep. 17, we lose all of the camels. So all of the animals are gone, which is a real measure of wealth in the ancient world. And in verse 18 and 19, we lose all of his sons and daughters in one whirlwind. Now, you would think, okay, now he's going to curse God. That's what Satan had claimed. But like I said before, Satan turns out to be completely wrong. He doesn't curse God. So instead, he says, verse 20, then Job arose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground and worshipped. In his loss, he turns heavenward with meekness, with humility. These rent clothes and shaved head, it's this sign of humility and meekness and this nothingness before God, that total recognition of who I am compared to who is. So he's lost everything that God had given him, and instead of cursing God, he humbly worshipped God. And then in verse 21, his words, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. That is Job's finest moment in the beginning of this story, saying, look, all these things, they're not really mine. God gave them to me, and he can take them away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. That is a powerful, powerful perspective to maintain deep in our soul, so that when we find ourselves in those moments, Job-like moments of loss and despair, we have something to draw upon. We're not empty. So now, that brings us to chapter 2. Satan now having a follow-up conversation, and God saying, see, you took away all those things, and Job is still right on track. At which point verse 5 says, but put forth thine hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. He's like, yeah, those were external things, but take away his health. Take away his sense of well-being and give him some pain, and now you'll see him curse you. Again, brothers and sisters, I hope we don't miss this message in the book of Job, that it doesn't just emphasize God's goodness, it emphasizes Satan's folly. It emphasizes his lack of knowledge, his lack of power, his lack of ability to force you to be bad and to curse God. All of his predictions are wrong. And now it's my job to make sure that all of his predictions for me turn out to be incredibly wrong again. So, Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. So he has made Job's life miserable. Again, many people reading this would say, how is this okay? Why is this an okay thing for Satan to be allowed to do this to Job, who has been so faithful and diligent and obedient? The age-old question, why do bad things happen to good people? Perhaps a slight variation on that theme might be important here. Who is it that gets to decide what a bad thing is or what a good thing is? Sometimes things happen to us and we categorically label them as bad, when in fact they might be exactly what we needed in our eternal progression. Not from a worldly perspective, not using earthly lenses would we say those are good things, but from an eternal perspective, when we look back on our life, some of those periods of time that were the most painful, the most bitter, the most perplexing, the most frustrating, just might turn out to be the most shaping and the most profoundly powerful periods of our life for helping us to become who God sent us to this earth to become. So maybe we are asking, why do bad things happen to good people? When the better question might be, how can I have eyes to see that which is truly bad and that which is hard, difficult, but shaping for me? So here's Job in the depths of despair, scraping his boils with potsherds, and he's sitting down among the ashes, another sign of humility and meekness. And his wife in verse 9 says, dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. In other words, there's something inside of the natural man tendency that would almost prefer to play the emotional martyrdom trump card, so to speak, to give up and to say, oh, so much good it did me to try to keep God's commandments and to try to love him and serve him. Look what it brought me. But I love that Job doesn't do that. He said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God? And shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Job sin with his lips. So he's basically saying, again, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. It's a different way of saying that. I am in the Lord's hands. He can do with me whatever he wants. And if he wants to take all these things away, including my health, so be it. I'm not going to curse him. So then verse 11, when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his own place. So we get Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They come. And verse 11 says, They had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. Are you noticing the significance of those two words? To mourn with those that mourn and comfort those that stand in need of comfort. It's beautiful. We've made covenantal promises to do that for each other. And here these three friends are coming to fulfill that role. And how do they do it? Verse 12. When they lifted up their eyes afar off and knew him not, they lifted up their voice and wept. And they rent every one his mantle and sprinkled dust upon their heads toward heaven. So they are also mourning with him that mourns and comforting Job, who stands in need of comfort, by joining him in his depth. Verse 13, so they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and none spake a word unto him, for they saw that his grief was very great. So my chaplain friends at BYU, Lee Harms and Justin Topp, they train and teach our chaplain candidates. I hear them using this phrase frequently. It's called the ministry of presence. A chaplain, or in this case, these three friends, they don't try to fix the problem. They don't try to take it away. They don't try to explain it away. There's something very profound and very comforting about the ministry of presence, of just being with somebody, breathing their air, walking their soil, carrying a small portion of the burden that they're experiencing. Human empathy and compassion that is profound. You see verse 12 and 13 is the essence of a ministry of presence. They're not fixing anything. They're literally mourning with him. A colleague and a dear friend at work, Ken Alford, lost his sweet wife, and that was very hard for him. A while after her passing, when things had settled down just a little bit for Ken, I asked him, can you teach me? Can you help me understand better what would be more helpful and more beneficial to say to people who are struggling with loss or with serious challenges? And he shared a little analogy with me that really resonated. He said he had learned from his daughter, who earlier had lost her spouse, that grief like this is similar to a box. And inside that box are two things. There's a ball and there's a button. And when that box gets shaken up, the ball hits that button. And when that button gets hit, it triggers all of the human emotions of fear, sadness, loneliness, regret, anger, frustration, questions. All of the challenges, all of the tears begin to flow when that button gets pushed. And he said, right after the passing of a loved one, or right after a major trauma, that box is really small, that button is really big, and that ball is really big. And everything is constantly seeming to trigger those challenges and those wrestles. And over time, as the Lord allows us to work through this grieving process, the ball gets a little smaller. The box seems to get a little bigger. The button gets pushed a little less frequently. It's still there. The ball is still there. And at any moment down the road, it can still get pushed. But the frequency and the intensity of those emotional challenges seems to get less and less over time. So his counsel was, when ministering to somebody who's experienced great loss, don't try to explain why they experienced the loss. Don't try to point out why they should be grateful for the loss or why God trusts them to be able to put him through this challenge, or why God needed that person more than you needed them, or any of these things that we often say, because he said that just makes the box a lot smaller and the ball a lot bigger and the pain a lot more present. He said sometimes you don't have to say anything. You just be with somebody. The ministry of presence is a real thing. It doesn't mean that you have to go into these settings and never say a word. It just means that we need to let that person know, I'm here. I can't take away your box. I can't block off that button, and I can't take away the ball inside to prevent it from hitting it. But I can make sure that you don't go through this alone. It's a powerful opportunity for us to know better how to mourn with those that mourn and comfort those that stand in need of comfort. Now, what we enter in this next phase is chapters 3 all the way through 37. You get the pinnacle of the three friends saying nothing but mourning with him genuinely for 7 days. And then they start giving the answers. And they start sharing an ancient idea that is actually one of the foundational principles underlying idol worship, idolatry in the Old Testament. You see, people had this belief that if you made sacrifices to your gods, and there were gods and goddesses for everything, overlooking every aspect of the human experience, and if you made the appropriate sacrifices to the appropriate gods at the appropriate time, then you would bring down divine favor, and you would be prospered in these different areas that god or goddess oversees. And if you sin by not performing the right sacrifices or not pleasing, paying homage to that god or goddess in the right way at the right time, then you would bring down divine disfavor upon your head. Unfortunately, that doctrine carried over to the Greek philosophers 400 years, 300 years before Jesus is born, and it continues to grow so that when the Savior comes into the picture, it's fully believed, to the point where you're going to have some of his disciples saying things like, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? So they're still holding on to this ancient custom that any disability, any loss, any setback, any trial is simply a sign of divine disfavor. You did something wrong, so tell us what it was and repent of it so that this will go away, so this problem will be fixed. This life was never intended to be the end goal. This life is a test. So we're given challenges, we're given wrestles, we're given struggles, and sometimes poor decisions can bring suffering upon our own heads and upon the heads of people around us. That is true. But not all suffering is a sign of divine disfavor. Sometimes people will lose their health, or lose their job, or lose a home, or a car, or property, or money, or whatever it may be, because this isn't a perfect world. We live in a fallen, telestial world with lots of challenges and lots of opportunities to exercise our faith in God and to move forward in spite of those challenges. So, what you see going on in chapters 3 through 37 are lengthy discourses from his three friends and lengthy responses from Job. Ironically, if you read all of these chapters in succession, so I just did this again yesterday, reading all of them, just one right after the other, it is fascinating to me how often these people, including Job at times, are making claims or making bold statements that turn out to be not the complete story, not always right on. Because we speak from our own limited perspective, We think we understand what's going on, but this book of Job is all about showing Satan's folly and showing our folly, and then showing God's supremacy, God's greatness and His glory and His all-knowing power. So, just as a couple of examples of high points in these chapters where much of it is the wrong effort to try to help somebody feel good because they have diagnosed the problem incorrectly. So now the prescription they're giving isn't going to help because they're going in the wrong direction. But along the way, there are these little benchmarks of truth that are really insightful, really powerful, actually, as far as contemplating our very existence. And they have to do with life and afterlife, with resurrection. For instance, you get in chapter 14 this profound question that is posed here in verse 14. If a man die, shall he live again? All the days of my appointed time will I wait till my change come. I'll wait forever for that new life. And then you come over to chapter 19, and Job makes this very profound statement. In chapter 14, it was a question. Now in chapter 19, it's a declaration. For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God. That's amazing, because it's through this ongoing suffering that he's lost all of his possessions, he's lost his health, now he's lost the good favor of his friends who have been judging him and condemning him and accusing him, pointing fingers and telling him what he needs to do, all of which is off the target, off the mark of reality. And he's lost all of this. And in that process, he's discovering things that I don't know. I'm sure God could come up with other ways to teach us those lessons. But in this context, this is the way God chose to teach Job these lessons. Through his suffering, he now comes to this beautiful realization of, I know that my Redeemer liveth, and shall stand in the latter day upon the earth, and he will resurrect me. That's a profound truth for you and me to put into the well of our soul and store it up and keep renewing it for those moments of need, so that it's there for the taking because of the rock upon which we're built. That reminder that all of these physical challenges, they're temporary. This is not our permanent state. Pain and loss and sorrow and rejection, all of these challenges we're facing, they're part of a mortal test. How are we going to use our agency? I love C.S. Lewis's book, The Problem of Pain. I want to share just 2 quotes from that book with you. He says, we can ignore even pleasures, but pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. So if you're sitting here listening or watching this today, and you're in pain to one degree or another, instead of being afraid of or angry at God when we get these crucible times of life, the perspective here learned from Job and from the Savior Jesus Christ ultimately is, dear God on high, what am I to learn from this? How can I be shaped? You've got my attention, because because I'm in pain. I don't like it. I don't want it, but I want to take advantage of the time in this crucible or in this refiner's fire to allow thee to actually refine me, not for me to reject thee. So teach me, shape me, mold me, help me. Now, again, it's easy to say those words and to keep those perspectives when you're not in pain, but if we can put that reserve water into the well of our soul, it will bless us at those times down the road when it's needed. So now we come over to chapter 28. This is one of the pinnacle chapters of the entire book of Job, where there's this powerful line of reasoning about all of the things that you can do in this world to seek things. You can go dig into mines and find gold and silver. You can go into the depths of the sea. You can go onto the mountaintops. You can go everywhere. And the question is asked in chapter 28, verse 20. Whence then cometh wisdom? And where is the place of understanding? Where do we gain true wisdom? Where do we discover truth? So then he answers that question in verse 21 down through 28. And we'll finish with verse 28. He says, and unto man, God says, behold the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. True wisdom is to be found in the Lord, not in the things of the world, not in the rational justifications and reasoning that the world gives us, but in eschewing evil and turning to God. That's where true wisdom is found. Now, let's jump over to the final chapters, 38. After all of this back and forth with his three friends, and then an additional one comes along, Elihu, and throws his thoughts out for everybody as well. Then finally you get to chapter 38, and God takes over the discussion. And ironically, God doesn't answer any of their questions. He doesn't give any context. He doesn't explain, okay, let me make this clear. Here's what happened, and here's why I did what I did. He doesn't give the why. He doesn't give the backstory. In fact, instead of engaging these people at the level they've been discussing things, he elevates their thoughts and asks a different set of questions. By some counts, it's 77 questions that God asks in chapter 38 through 42. And you'll notice that man is not able to give a single answer to any one of the 77 questions. Can you see that reversal here? We ask questions of God that he is perfectly capable of answering, and often does. In this case, he didn't give clear answers to all of the questions and concerns that are facing Job and his family and his people. But then God asks us questions that we can't answer. Again, this book invites us to move beyond the mundane of mortality, beyond the earthly lenses and perspectives of life, and to think celestial, as President Nelson invited us to do, to raise our sights and to look from a higher perspective at who we are and who God is, and to stop treating him as if it's a transactional relationship, and to shift it into a covenantal relationship, one that is filled with faith and trust. Because God trusted me, he trusted you, he had faith in us, and now he's asking us to have faith in him. So, just as an example, a small handful of questions out of this list of 77. Chapter 38, verse 4. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare, if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line or the measuring rod upon it? Wherefore are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? Just this earth you're living on, how was it built? Show me any of the people or any of the materials that were used to make it. When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of the womb? He's asking these big astronomical questions, and it goes on, pointing out man's weakness and flaws and ignorance compared to God's glory and knowledge and power. If you're wrestling with any degree of faith, it's probably these are some good chapters to read to remind ourselves, I don't need to know all of the answers to have faith in God. I just need to better understand God. I need to focus on Him, put Christ at the center of my life rather than at the periphery of my decisions and my perspectives. So now we turn over to the final chapter, chapter 42, which is Job's response to God's questions and God's interactions and corrections for him and the people. It says in verse 1, Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that thou canst do everything, and that no thought can be withholden from thee. You know, I wonder if we would have chapter 42, and we've only gotten into it 2 verses. But I wonder if we'd have this if it hadn't been for what happened in chapter 1. You see, sometimes it's in those what we would classify as bad things that happen, especially to good people who are trying really hard to be good, that we really come to understand the Lord Jesus Christ better. Because there was nobody who was better infinitely, and there was nobody who suffered more than him, and who didn't turn away from God and curse him, but showed us this perfect pattern. Now let's look at verse 5 and 6, at what happens next for Job. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eye seeth thee. Wherefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. By the way, for a side note, this is where the poetry portion of the book of Job ends, is right after verse 6. Everything before verse 6, all the way clear back to chapter 3, was this long form poetry written. Chapter 1 and 2 is written in prose. It's more of a storytelling. And that's exactly what happens in the Hebrew, is in chapter 42, verse 7. It shifts back into the simple narrative flow rather than the poetic literature. And there is a powerful thoughts to keep in mind segment in Come Follow Me about poetry that would be very beneficial for you to read and study so that we can all better understand Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and this section that is more poetic in its form and in its nature. So, at the ending of the story, God gives back in abundance a double portion of all of the animals and of all of the wealth that Job had lost back in chapter 1. And he also gives him children again. Sounds a little bit like a symbolic overview of our life. That we strive to build up things and to gain things and to build life. Sometimes things are lost, but God promises to the faithful, if they will keep Him at the foreground of their faith and of their life, that everything that was lost will be regained. but eternally. Now, back to C.S. Lewis's book, The Problem of Pain. He says in a different place, our Father refreshes us on the journey with some pleasant ends, but will not encourage us to mistake them for home. This story isn't about the sheep, the oxen, the cattle, the donkeys, or even the lands and the houses. This story is about building a relationship with Jesus Christ and coming to know God better than we know him before. And unfortunately for us, sometimes the quickest route to learning all of these incredible things that we need to understand is through dark forests of despair and loss and hurt and health concerns and saying farewell to loved ones or experiencing trauma or tragedy. Let us not adopt the ancient philosophy that any of those things are simply a sign of divine disfavor, but rather let us turn towards the divine and seek to better understand the divine, and in so doing, we will be better equipped to make sense of the mortal tests and challenges that we're facing today. So to finish, I want to share one more time the lyrics to a song that has just struck a powerful chord with me recently, called Blessings by Lara Story. I've shared this before. The chorus says, what if your blessings come through raindrops? What if your healing comes through tears? What if 1,000 sleepless nights are what it takes to know you're near? What if the trials of this life are your mercies in disguise? So to finish, I want to simply add my testimony to Job's. I know that my Redeemer liveth, and because he lives, so shall I, and so shall you, eternally, not an eternal test, but in an eternal sphere of glory that he provides for us. And I leave that with you in the sacred name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Know that you're loved.